What's up, everyone, and welcome back to Locked On Bucks. This might be an emergency podcast. I'm not 100% sure. I wasn't expecting to do an emergency podcast, but the people have called for it. Grayson Allen has signed an extension before the rookie scale extension deadline. I don't think that we really were expecting it, but we're going to break it all down here. Of course, we've got Frank here, who knows far more about the cap than I will ever forget. And then we're going to talk Bucks Nets. Opening night is finally here. Ring night, banner ceremony. It's going to be a lot of fun. So let's get into it.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Bucks. I'm your host, Kane Pittman. You can listen to me and see me on the show daily now, wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, and also find my words over at ESPN and NBA Australia. And joining me is the founder of brewhoop.com, longtime voice of the podcast, Frank Madden. I'm not going to bring in the short-term face of the podcast. I'm already over it. But there's Frank. And I think this does qualify as an emergency podcast, Frank. We're actually going to do two shows today. So if you're listening to this one before you get to the Over and Under podcast, don't miss the Over and Unders. We do it every year. It's my third time doing the Over and Unders, but Frank, you've done far more than that. It's always fun, and the people were calling for it, so we're going to get to that. Of course, we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every single day. Wherever you get your podcast, it's free. And now on YouTube. Frank, like I said last time, the listeners and the viewers have answered the call. 1.2 thousand subscribers and counting, a big percentage of those in Greece. We've got the Greek fans on board, Frank, and we're very happy about that. But let's get to Grayson Allen. So first of all, and you can take this wherever you want, but were you expecting this? The deadline was 6 p.m. Eastern time. Of course, Donte DiVincenzo was a potential extension candidate as well. Were you expecting this with Grayson Allen?
No, probably not. I mean, I've generally been sort of assuming that, long term, they're not going to keep both Grayson Allen and Donte DiVincenzo just because, again, one of them long term has to be a reserve. And look, hey, I would love it if you can keep both those guys, if they're both, as good as we think and hope they could be, that you retain both those guys beyond this coming season and, whatever. Then one of them's just a really good bench player. But my assumption has been, again, with the tax situation that the Bucks have, that most likely they would have to choose one of those because one of them can start and the other, again, becomes what, $10+ million six man, which again is that those certainly exist in the NBA, but you have to make choices. And, it's not just Grayson or Donte, but you think about, other guys and their situations going into next summer. Bobby Portis just took that bargain basement contract. He technically signed a 2-year deal, but he has an out. And I think the assumption has been that he will opt out and get paid next summer. What kind of understanding there might have been with the Bucks, we don't really know. But it creates an interesting dynamic if there's an assumption that Bobby signed this deal on the premise that he was going to opt out and get, $10 million a year or whatever it might be next summer. So you start to look at kind of the Bucks cap and it's like, okay, well, if Bobby's opting out and expecting to get paid, Pat Connaughton has a $5.7 million player option next year. Again, we'll see kind of what Pat does this year. He'll be getting up closer to 30. So whether you pay him, a raise on top of that next summer if he opts out, it's tough to say, right? I mean, but he's certainly a guy who has shown he can be a two-way guy, and he was obviously a huge part of that finals run last summer. So those two guys are out, and then we haven't even talked about Jordan Nwora, who's on a minimum contract right now, but will be able to be a restricted free agent next summer. And that one, I mean, I have no idea what Jordan Nwora's market could look like a year from now, given that we're just still trying to see if he can become a rotation guy. So, by the way, second straight episode, my wife just making noise in the kitchen here, just putting on her Rockets gear and just disrespecting all things Milwaukee Bucks. Taking our cute dog with her. At least our puppy, who's now like enormous, didn't maul me while she was here. But yeah, I mean, we don't even know what Nwora's situation could be. I mean, he could be a guy, he could be struggling to find a roster spot a year from now, or he could be a guy that commands a mid-level contract. I mean, it's all possible in theory, right? So there's just a lot of variables, and I think the only thing I would say is if those guys all play as well as you want them to play, you're not going to see the Bucks bring back all of them. It's just going to be extremely prohibitive from a pricing standpoint. And again, hey, hopefully they're all really good and the Bucks pay through the nose to keep them and whatever, right? As we always say, it's not, your job as a fan to worry about the owner's pocketbooks. But if we're going to, apply a lens of realism, you would expect that they're going to have to make some choices there. So I think the Grayson versus Dante one is the most obvious choice that they would presumably make, just because those guys are the most similar in terms of positional fit. Literally Grayson slotting in for Dante here while he's injured. So again, I was surprised because I figured that they would just basically say, all right, you guys play this year out. You're both going to be restricted free agents. So if we want to keep you, we can match any offers you get next summer. And basically they would let the market dictate. They would let the season sort of dictate kind of what happens. I made a comment to someone when I said that. I said, Dante probably is looking for 12 to 14 million per. Bucks would presumably want I don't know, a steep discount on that, given, this injury is not a simple injury and he's going to be out for, again, we're guessing, but just reading kind of the tea leaves, that he's going to be out for a while here to start the year. Whereas Grayson, I thought, just because he hasn't been here, it's kind of weird. Like it does. I mean, if you put the proverbial gun to my head, like who's the better player when healthy, I would probably say Dante, just because of the defense and because his shooting did get to the point last year where, he was in the 37-38% range. So it's not like he was still kind of at that 32-33% range. But, is he pay 14 million rather than, 8 or 9 million better? And it just seems like with Allen, his market was naturally going to be somewhat depressed because of the fact that this is his third team in 4 years. And, he kind of has to prove it. And you have a potential here to sort of buy low before hopefully he has a really good season as a starter playing on an awesome Bucks team where he's going to have a lot of opportunities to get open looks and play off of, superstars that he hasn't had a chance to play with in the past. So I thought it wasn't likely, in part just because I figured, they probably just don't want to commit to, a big chunk of money to him when you don't know what's going to happen with these other guys. And, he might also just say like, I don't want to take 7 million a year or whatever, because I want to bet on myself and see what happens. And so I sort of pegged like his range sort of in like the $7-10 million per year range. And then a few hours later we hear, nominally the high end of the range is 2 years, 20 million. I think Jim Wazarski in the Journal Sentinel reported it's like up to 19.5 with incentives. So I'm not sure where the reporting has gone since then, but we'll see kind of where the number ends up. But maybe it's $8-9 million a year, more likely. We'll see kind of what potential incentives actually look like. But a little under 10 million a year, and only 2 years, which I think is probably a
what happened to the 3-year horse special, man? What's going on?
I know.
How did Grayson bypass this? No one can bypass this.
Yeah. I mean, no player option. What's going on? He's like the only guy not to get a player option. So I mean, I think it's fine from a market perspective. If you told me that, like, just in kind of just a vacuum, like, what do I think Grayson Allen's going to be worth that contract with the Bucks? I would say I think he is. I think especially he's going to be worth that in the regular season. I think he's going to play very well as a starter. We'll talk a little bit in our over under podcast about what might happen when Dante DiVincenzo comes back, and is he going to be a starter? But I think for the foreseeable future, I think Grayson Allen's going to be the starter. And again, he's more of a role playing starter, but I think it's going to be a really good fit for him. And then I think really the big question is just going to be in the playoffs. Defensively, he's not as good defensively as Dante DiVincenzo. So, does that create issues with matchups at some point in the playoffs, especially in like a potential net series? You could have him run around on Joe Harris, but when he start put into pick and rolls, do other guys start to take advantage of him more, right? And previously we would have said like Pat Connaughton, like, oh well, can Pat stay on the floor or stay on the floor, right? Like people always get love to throw around that like idea of like guys can't stay on the floor. Pat obviously showed he could stay on the floor and defended really consistently, I thought, through the playoffs last year. And I think this year that'll be a question for Grayson is, can he be a guy that that really can kind of defend a position in the playoffs, or does he kind of get, you hope. I don't think he's going to be Bryn Forbes in terms of just being Bryn Forbes is just too small and just too easily picked on. But I think that's always a concern. Is does a guy, because again, you put a lineup of their 5 guys, playoff offenses, like they will hunt the weak link, and if you've got pretty strong defenders at every other position, they're definitely going to test those weaker links. So I think that's a big question for Grayson Allen, is just, can his shooting and offense, kind of compensate for potential, issues he may have defensively, or maybe he just shows that playing in a really good defensive system with really good players around him, that, that concern is just sort of overblown. I mean, he has some decent defensive tools, obviously, with his athleticism. So we'll see. But I think fine on the value front. I think the only question is, well, did you just basically commit yourself to Grayson Allen over either Dante, or maybe sort of, a combination of maybe some of these other guys who also may need to get paid next summer?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I do have one thought that I want to get to there, but I guess, anticipated that we were going to have this conversation all year long and comparing Dante and comparing Grayson. And it's not to say that we're not going to do that, but now we're going to do it through a different lens because they've already extended Grayson. So we'll see where that pans out. But NBA season is starting tonight, as most people will be listening to this, which means I'm going to be stuck on the couch almost permanently for the next 6 months, which means I might need to purchase a Theragun, because let's be honest, if I'm sitting on the couch all day, I may as well at least be taking care of my muscles. And with Theragun, sponsor of the podcast, you can stop the stress of daily life weighing on your body, whether you're an elite athlete or someone like me sitting on the couch being lazy. Theragun can help. Theragun is the handheld percussive therapy device that releases your deepest muscle tension using scientifically calibrated combo of depth, speed, and power. And it's as quiet as an electric toothbrush. The Gen 4 Theragun doesn't just feel good, it gets to the source of the pain by releasing tension using Theragun's signature percussive therapy, which goes 60% deeper than vibration alone. So you can try Theragun for 30 days, starting at only $199. Go to therabody.com/locked-on right now to get your Gen 4 Theragun. That's therabody.com/locked-on, therabody.com/locked-on. So I guess for me, when I saw this deal, and you've kind of already pointed to it, Frank, that in the end, it might actually even be less than the 220. And I think from what I saw, and it's kind of funny, I mean, you mentioned kind of the new flavor that you bring into the team, the new player. And we were like, geez, there's some people that aren't loving Grayson Allen based on his history, Wisconsin fans, whatever. He does seem to have become very, very popular. He's everyone's favorite role player. He's going to have a massive season because he's knocking down shots. So I think in general, the consensus seems to be that 220 is a good deal. So if it sneaks under that, you'll be feeling pretty good. One of my first thoughts was that this is John Horst saying, okay, well, even now with Dante not being a part of the last playoff runs, his value is probably still seen around the league as higher than that. And certainly if you're Dante, you're not going to agree to an extension that the Bucks want to offer you right now because you missed out on the playoff run. So he probably thinks he can play and earn more money this season, which, is certainly, we hope it's true, because that means that he's playing well with the team. So I saw this Grayson Allen extension as maybe Horst sitting there and saying, well, this is a pretty good deal for now. And we're backing that when he plays next to Giannis and when he plays next to Chris Middleton and all these guys, he's going to shoot the ball really well. We think that he can be a playoff caliber player. And by the end of this season, you might not be able to get him for 220. It might be well above that. Dante might be also above that. And then you have none of these guys. And look, you could move in and get an extension anyway. But that's the way I looked at it. I thought this is getting in early, locking down one of those guys. It does complicate factors with a lot of other players on the roster, but it seemed like a good value deal for now.
Yeah, I mean, the last 2 years, Grayson Allen, 61% true shooting in 1920, 59% last year. I mean, those are, much better true shooting numbers than Dante has put up. And obviously a lot of that's because, he's just a better 3-point shooter, or at least a more proven 3-point shooter, 40%, 39% the last 2 years, per 36 at almost 8 3-point attempts last year. And I'm still having visions of Grayson Allen just destroying the Bucks' inexplicable zone defense that they rolled out in that second half of the game in Milwaukee, where the Bucks just sort of like never seem to have any type of rhythm. So yeah, I think I think this is obviously a bit of a gamble that they feel like he's going to look really good playing in the Buck system, and I think there's definitely something to that, and I think probably the fact that his agent and him opted to go for 2 years is them saying, yeah, we think actually we're like going to outplay this we think
Yeah,
we're going to
yeah.
outplay this contract, and so we want to get out on the market before he gets too old, right? And he's older for a guy in his position. He's actually just turned 26 a couple weeks ago. So again, this kicks in after this coming year, so this takes him into his late 20s. So yeah, I mean, I think the other piece too of those, I kind of framed it as well. Are you kind of committing to one guy who maybe you don't necessarily know is going to be, obviously the best player out of the group that I mentioned, um, and does that prevent you from signing one of these other guys? The flip side is this means you've locked down at least somebody out of that group. And I think the advantage for the Bucks though is that when I talk about those, that group of guys, Grayson, Dante, and Jordan Wara were all going to be restricted free agents. So obviously less risk of losing those guys because you'd be able to match the contracts that they might get. Bobby and Pat, obviously a different boat since those guys would be unrestricted free agents. So if those guys don't like the contract you're offering them or just want a different opportunity, they can do whatever they want. And by the way, I'm just having images of one of my favorite moments of kind of the championship celebration is Bobby and Pat Connaughton being interviewed next to each other, sitting on the floor post game 6, and I forget who it was. Someone asked them how much champagne they'd had, and they just sort of looked at each other, and it was basically like they were auditioning for like a buddy cop show or something like that, or a buddy comedy, and they just looked at each other, split second, and then just started laughing at each other simultaneously. Um, so hopefully, the Bobby Pat comedy duo can be retained, um, but I mean, this is kind of just what the Bucks are going to sort of have to be dealing with, every offseason is just this idea of with these role players, you hope these role players outplay their contracts, prove that they're worth more, prove that they have, higher market values, and then you have to make this difficult decision of do you pay that? Do you pay the tax that comes with that? Or do you say, you know what, we're going to have to go find the next Bobby Portis, the next Jordan Wara, the next Pat Connaughton, the next Dante DiVincenzo via free agency, the draft, whatever it might be. And obviously that's really hard. But honestly, if you're talking about, being a GM and a front office of a contender like the Bucks, that sort of becomes the challenge. You've done the hard part of getting, your superstar locked up for the long term, and you've got his two all-star running mates also locked up for the long term. So that's the great news. Now the challenge is, how do you fill in the roster around him so that, and again, I'm projecting a little bit, but I think this year's team is deeper than last year's team. How do you give yourself a chance to be a little deeper, have a little more margin of error than you might otherwise would. So yeah, I mean, again, these are, we can kind of spin our wheels on this kind of forever. But I think again, I feel pretty confident Grayson Allen's going to be a very good regular season player. I think he can be a good postseason player that helps you win championships. And I think, to be honest, I don't know what. I mean, I like Dante, but and I want to be wary too of like, I think as fans, you have to be careful that like the shiny new toy doesn't just kind of overpower the tried and true guy that and in Dante's case, like we know he has some flaws. The finishing is problematic at times. He doesn't really get to the free throw line. I think his pick and roll game, you know, I, I mean, even just seeing Grayson a little bit, I think his threat as a shooter and the fact that he's just, I think, just more in control and in a better finisher around the rim, I think just makes me a little more confident in kind of him as a two-man game guy. Whereas I feel like Dante, even with his passing ability, just I just don't feel like he's ever really kind of paid off his potential as kind of a second side creator. Um, so we'll see. I mean, I don't want to create just this constant dynamic of you have to choose one, but that's obviously part of kind of the implicit kind of position the Bucks have put themselves in, having both these guys. And I don't know. Again, and I don't know. Think this is entirely because we just saw the Bucks win a championship without Dante, but whenever I've heard just the numbers thrown around, I mean, Again, we just saw Kevin Huerter get 4 years, $65 million. I think if Dante was healthy, I'm guessing his agents would have probably pushed for something on that order. And man, that just seems like a lot of money for Dante, because even though he does a lot of like role player stuff very well, I don't know. I don't feel like there's like a lot more ceiling to what he's gonna do. Which again, I don't want to diminish his potential for improvement, but some of the numbers you're talking about, that it feels pretty steep, and it feels like you're paying for the fact that he's your guy that you drafted and you kind of want to keep him, rather than the fact that he's just actually really that good. But I don't know. What's your kind of view on what Dante's market should be? Because I feel like it's probably closer to the Grayson Allen number that he signed for than Kevin Huerter, which again is a little bit of a straw man. But I feel like there's an upper ceiling to what Dante DiVincenzo is worth in this league, and I don't know. I'm curious to see where he ends up next summer. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, well, I think, and let me just say, by the way, Frank, we've got 2 pods to do today, so 25 minutes each. We haven't even got to Bucks Nets. We're already at 21. And look, we know this is the way we go here, but we're going to get to Bucks Nets really quickly. But the one thing I will say, and I think it was John Hollinger that brought it up, I've mentioned it on this podcast before, but he said that he's a guy that's probably going to be more valuable to other teams than he is the Bucks, just by virtue of the role that he's playing. And I do think they're definitely taking a different direction by paying Grayson Allen. You think about the guys that played that 5th starter position over the last few years. Obviously, last year you had Dante DiVincenzo on a rookie contract. The year before it was Wesley Matthews on a minimum. The year before that it was Malcolm Brogdon on a rookie contract. So that they've actually been able to find really good contributors in that sort of second guard spot at bargain prices, or by drafting a second round pick or drafting a guy that can fit in and play that role. So that's the challenge for me when I look at Dante DiVincenzo, and if that value is expanded, which I think he could be a more valuable player elsewhere and perhaps expand his game a little bit and get a few more opportunities to develop other areas of his game. So that's going to be the challenge for the Bucks. If that's the price tag, are you really paying that much for a guy that you know that the role is going to be limited when you're playing in the same team as Giannis, Chris, and Drew Holiday? It's just the reality they are in, and we've seen it for years gone by. When you're a contender, all your role players are inflated value as well, because they come in, life's easy for those guys, and they're knocking down open shots, and Giannis is making them look fantastic. So it's generally just the nature of being on a contender. So we'll see how that plays out. As we move on to opening night, though, we know the Bucks and the Nets are getting ready to play, 2 of the favorites for the NBA championship. So if you head to betonline.ag, you can check all the odds, the props, the lines. There's a new web interface for the start of basketball season with all those added extras in there, and you can check it out. BetOnline remains your number 1 spot for all your basketball and football action this season. Head to the new updated website on mobile device today, or on your mobile device today, to sign up and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use the promo code LOCKEDON to receive your bonus. From basketball, football, baseball, postseason, NHL, boxing, UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. That's BetOnline, where the game starts. And don't forget about our long-term friends and long-term sponsors of the podcast, rockauto.com. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and then wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket, so save time and money. Don't spend 30%, 50%, or even 100% more for the same parts when you don't have to. Rock Auto, they're a family business. They've been serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. So go to the website, rockauto.com, right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know we sent you. So I mentioned that Locked On Bucks is obviously everyone's first listen of the day, but for a second listen of the day, why don't you check out the Ultimate Season Preview podcast? I had someone on YouTube trying to track it down, and he said it was chaos, and it was chaos. I was trying to get a word in, Frank, among David Locke, the Locked On Lakers crew. There was about 8 teams on there. I'm not pushy enough. I could hardly get a word in. And in the end, I think I just said, we're the champs. I don't really need to add much to this conversation here. You guys are all chasing us. So anyway, go check it out. It was a fun podcast. Make that your second listen of the day as you get yourself ready for opening night. But speaking of opening night, I guess the best way to start this, just looking at the injury report, no surprises really, Frank, but for the Bucks, no Rodney Hood, no Dante DiVincenzo, no Shemi Ojale, and no Bobby Portis. And so I tweeted it out. I mean, your backup big is Sandro Mamukelashvili, the two-way player, the rookie, the second-round pick. And for all our Greek listeners who, by the way, I've said are boosting our YouTube numbers in a big way, you might not know this, but last year I said that I didn't think Thanasis was going to be in a playoff rotation. And, oh, man, I had some passionate Greek fans after me saying that I was against Thanasis. So the same thing happened today. I said Mamukelashvili is your backup big. I had a Thanasis fan saying that it was disrespectful for Thanasis. Let me be clear. Mamukelashvili is the backup big that they have on the roster. But I don't even think there's a guarantee he's going to play. The Bucks are going to go small. They're going to go small through necessity. You're going to see lots of Pat Connaughton playing in those swing positions, playing up to the 4 perhaps. You will see Thanasis out there on the floor. Jordan Wara is going to get big minutes, I suspect. And ultimately, you're probably going to see some Giannis at the 5.
I mean, this really comes down to it's not about you disliking Greece. It's just about you loving the country of Georgia is really what this really comes down to. Just we saw it when Zaza was here. You just have an innate fondness for the Black Sea beaches of Georgia, and those endless summer nights of Tbilisi that you've grown so fond for. Yeah, it's funny because we were messaging about it, and I was just kind of like, "Is Mamo really going to play?" Like,
yeah,
I guess. I mean, he just put up 20 on basically the Nets starters the other night, and then pretty much didn't do anything the next 2 games in the preseason. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of those out of the frying pan into the fire type situations. I think back to the first game. I guess this would have been of the 2013-14 season in New York against the Knicks. Do you remember when was it Brandon Knight? Like, did he pull a hammy or something? Like I don't know if it was before the game or like in the first minutes of the game or something. And Nate Walters had to play basically the whole game. So yeah, I mean, you don't expect to need a late second round pick to have to play a major role in the first game of the season between the defending champs and the Vegas favorites. But certainly, just given the way things have kind of broken here with Bobby out, the lack of depth at the big spots, and then Shemi, who's not a big man per se, but would presumably be getting potential minutes at the 4. Yeah, it's likely we're going to see some Mamu, and we're likely to see some Thanasis, and that could be interesting. Because I think the interesting thing for the Nets is, I mean, the Nets, last year in the playoffs, we saw them play a lot of Jeff Green at the big spots, and eventually they basically decided at the very end of the series that we can't play Jeff Green against Giannis anymore, in spite of Jeff Green also having one of the greatest shooting nights of his life in whatever it was. It was game 5, I guess. But it's interesting because this year they've obviously have LaMarcus Aldridge back. You guys were talking with the Locked On Nets guys. Is Nick Claxton going to play? Is that a thing? We'll see. And
he didn't have a lot of luck either. Yeah, I mean, it was tough.
And Paul Millsap is also on this roster now. So add in that to Blake Griffin, who obviously played well against the Bucks last year. They actually have some big man depth relative to what they had last year. And no, I'm not going to include Bruce Brown in my big man depth, but despite the way he plays, so yeah, it's going to be some interesting matchups. I think probably I think the starting 5 is probably less interesting now that Kyrie is out, just because I assume that the starting 5 we'll see is the one that we kind of got used to seeing for most of the series last year or last spring, last summer, whenever the hell that series was. I would guess Bruce Brown is basically slotting in for Kyrie, and we saw him give Chris Middleton a lot of a lot of problems defensively, and then a very mixed bag offensively from him in that series with Brook Lopez guarding him at times and the Bucks being able to hide guys on him due to his lack of shooting. So I would assume it'll be basically Harden, Bruce Brown, Joe Harris, KD, and Blake Griffin, which we kind of know what to expect from that group. But obviously with no PJ Tucker. I don't know. I mean, I was going to ask you, and not to diminish the importance of Mamu discussion, but I think the most interesting question is how the Bucks defend Kevin Durant. And it was interesting because I was listening. I think it was on Zach Lowe's podcast. They were talking about how the Bucks defend the Nets, and he mentioned Drew Holiday potentially defending defending KD, and he mentioned Giannis potentially defending KD. But I think the very obvious answer is for Chris Middleton to defend KD. And again, not to say that that's the ideal scenario. You don't want Chris expending tons and tons of energy defensively, given the load he has to carry offensively. But he's obviously done that. Going back to KD's Golden State days, and even before that, Chris has had to defend KD a fair bit. So I don't know. I mean, I think that's probably the obvious answer is that KD will be guarded by Chris, and you put Drew on James Harden, but we'll see. I mean, I think it should be fun to see. Even though this is nominally the same group from the Nets, at least in terms of the star power with Harden and KD. Obviously, this time around we see a presumably full strength James Harden and Kevin Durant coming off not a very long off season, but an off season nevertheless. So I don't know. I'm excited for it. I mean, what are there other specific matchups, rotation points that you're really interested in, especially given some of the injuries and obviously the non-injury to Kyrie that he's out with?
I think to your point when you were just going through some of the guys I have with Griffin and Millsap, just when you look at the big man department there, I don't think it's a major issue for Milwaukee anyway, because the Nets are a team that play those guys at the 5. Durant will slide up to the 4. I'm curious to see Drew Holiday against James Harden, just because we didn't see it in the postseason. And really, from an intensity standpoint, I want to see whether Drew Holiday is right up defending him physically like he would, or like he has in the postseason game, or if because I think you'll be able to tell. I think the Bucks will be fired up for this game. They're obviously just going to get their rings. The banner's going to be there. But it's one of those nights where you never really know what to expect from the team. I always think back to the Miami-Chicago game, where Chicago went in and beat Miami by 45 points or something like that. And I remember watching that game and thinking to myself, it kind of makes sense. I'm like, it kind of makes sense. You get the ring, the banner's up there, you're excited, you're a little bit distracted, you're not really thinking about this. And in the meantime, you've got this team that wants to come in and whoop your ass on opening night and make a statement. And it's a double-edged sword with the Nets, because they doubly want to beat down the Bucks because they were the team that eliminated them. So there's some motivation there for Brooklyn. So those are the things I'll be looking at. And when it comes to Durant, I've always thought that Chris Middleton was the best option one-on-one. Even in stretches during the postseason, I thought that Middleton actually made me believe that he was going to have a chance to force him into a more difficult shot than PJ Tucker. But the difference is, over a 7-game series, PJ Tucker just did not stop. So he was the perfect guy for a 7-game series, and there's no way Chris Middleton could defend like that for 7 games and still be able to do it on the offensive end. So on one night, sure, I think they can go to put Middleton on Durant. And let's face it, Frank, even though PJ Tucker wore him down, Durant was still scoring nearly 50 points a night anyway. So what's the worst that can happen? We've seen it. What? Durant's going to drop 50 tomorrow night? Cool. He did that against the Bucks in the playoffs, and so he's so damn good. They'll probably put Middleton on him. I'm sure Pat Connaughton's going to see him at times. Maybe Thanasis will get a go, and we'll see if he can defend without fouling. I mean, it's going to be fun. I'm excited to see basketball. I'm excited to see it get going again. Obviously, the ring ceremonies are going to be cool as well. And I guess as we wrap this up, Frank, it's not on Bally Sports. I want to say Bally Sports. It's not on Bally Sports, which is kind of weird. I would have thought the local guys, but maybe Marcus Johnson could just chill in the stands and enjoy the night. But the TNT crew, Iron Eagle, Stan Van Gundy, what an upgrade from Marv and Chris Webber. What a day for basketball fans. And by the way, no disrespect to Marv, who obviously had a long career, but by the end, it was time.
Yeah, I mean, and as someone who grew up on NBA basketball in the early to mid 90s, I have a lot of appreciation for Marv. He was like the voice of, my sort of childhood in terms of watching, watching NBA basketball. So I had more tolerance for Marv's, late stage Marv when he was just sort of like mistaking people for the wrong players constantly and everything. And I don't think he was done any favors by spending a lot of that
Oh,
time with Chris Webber, who was just bad. So yeah, I was a huge fan of Stan Van Gundy as a color commentator when he did it a couple years ago, and the upside of him being unceremoniously fired by the Pelicans after a year is we'd get him back in a better place. It's only fair, right? We have to put up with this. I mean, I guess I don't I don't like despise Jeff Van Gundy as an announcer. I mean, I think he's better than Mark Jackson for sure.
it makes me laugh.
But but I always have just felt like, man, just give me more Stan, less Jeff. Um, so yeah, I'm looking forward to that group. Ian Eagle's tremendous. I mean, he's the Nets announcer, so it's kind of like, but he's the biggest pro.
Didn't even
You know,
think about that.
yeah. I mean, I'm not worried about him. Although I'm still confused. Like, where's Kevin Harlan in all this? Is I thought Kevin Harlan was the number one there for a while, and like,
Probably going to
but
be in LA.
1A, 1B. I don't know. Yeah, with Reggie Miller, I guess.
Yeah.
So we'll take it. But yeah, I mean, that's the irony of this is you remember when the Bucks were like barely on national television, and people would always complain about them not getting enough national television respect, and then they get on national television a bunch, and then everybody just complains about the announcers and not having, especially if you're outside Wisconsin. So like frequently, you can't get the Bally Sports broadcast. Obviously tonight there isn't. There tomorrow, yes, tonight there isn't going to be one anyway. Um, but yeah, it's just nobody's ever happy, I guess, is the point when it comes to announcers. So, but definitely looking forward to it. And I think one kind of random thing I'm looking for is I'm definitely interested in James Harden pick and roll now that he's, not limited by the hamstring injury. Gonna be really interested to watch sort of his pick and roll game. We know KD's incredible, but as much as he can pass, he's more about kind of his own individual game and creating shots for himself. Harden, I feel like, can really unlock the defense with the way that he's able to make plays for others as well. And so I'm really interested to see kind of how the Bucks defend him. Mike Budenholzer, Eric Bledsoe have had some interesting tactics against him in the past. We'll kind of see what they do. I'm curious if I mean, I don't expect them to like switch Brook Lopez onto him very much, but I am curious to see like maybe, with other guys, if Giannis is playing the 5, for instance, are they going to be willing to switch onto him? I think last time we saw these teams, Harden really couldn't explode to the rim anyway, so there was a lot of switches, and it was just kind of him settling for long threes. Obviously, has a little bit more capability right now, so it should be fun to see kind of the cat and mouse game between those guys. So yeah, NBA basketball, it's back, and I'm very excited for to see it. I'm very excited for ring night. I wish it was like not a 6:30 start. I'm worried that a lot of people are going to miss the ring night piece because of apparently it's like a 5:45 Central Time is when they want people in their seats for ring night, which is just really early, and people coming from work and stuff like that. I don't know. I'm concerned that it will not be, as full as we'd like it to be for something as momentous and important as ring night.
Yeah, 9:45 a.m. ring ceremony in Australia. I'm concerned I won't be awake. No, I will be. I'll be awake. I'll be ready to go, of course. It's going to be fun. Basketball's back. We'll have the post-game show after what is hopefully a fun night. But hey, even if the Bucks lose, we can fall back on just talking about the ring ceremony and the reactions of the players. So really, we can't lose tomorrow for Bucks Nets. It's going to be fun. As you pointed to, 6:30 p.m. Central Time. We will have the post-game show. And depending on what order you're listening to these things, make sure you check out the Over and Under podcast as well that we are about to record as you're listening to this. So for Frank and myself, enjoy the game. Enjoy opening night. The defending champs are back on the court. We'll catch you guys tomorrow.